Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It was just another afternoon in the city. The sun was warm. The air was filled with the sounds of honking cars, people talking, and the distant hum of an airplane in the sky. The sidewalks were crowded with people rushing in different directions, some heading home, others going to work, and some just enjoying their day. Among them was Emily Dawson, a quiet, unassuming woman. She walked calmly, her steps steady but careful. Her hand lightly held onto the harness of her loyal guide dog. Max was a big, strong German shepherd with golden brown fur and intelligent eyes. He moved with purpose, leading Emily safely through the busy streets. He watched everything: cars zooming past, bikes weaving through traffic, and even small children running ahead of their parents. Max saw it all. Emily's face was peaceful, but her world was different from the people around her. She couldn't see the bright colors of the billboards, the flashing lights of traffic signals, or the expressions on the faces of those who walked past her. Emily was blind. To most people, she seemed like just another woman trying to get through the day. Some glanced at her with pity. Others barely noticed her at all. But what they didn't know was that Max wasn't just any ordinary guide dog. Emily had been blind since she was a child. She didn't remember what colors looked like, and she had never seen her own face in a mirror. But that never stopped her from living her life. She had learned to do everything in her own way. She woke up every morning to the soft sound of Max breathing beside her bed. He was always there, always ready. His warm fur was the first thing she felt when she reached out in the morning. Emily's apartment was small but cozy. Everything had a place. Her shoes were always by the door, her coffee cup always on the second shelf in the kitchen, and her keys always hanging on the hook next to the fridge. She knew exactly where everything was. She didn't need sight to live her life. Max was her best friend, her protector, and her eyes. He helped her cross streets, avoid obstacles, and even find an empty seat on the bus. He was more than a guide. He was her guardian. Every day, they followed the same routine. Morning walk. Emily and Max walked to the park for some fresh air. Max loved stretching his legs and sniffing the trees while Emily enjoyed the sound of birds singing. Grocery store visit. Emily knew the store owner, Mr. Lewis, who always greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Emily. Need help finding anything today?" he would ask. But Emily never needed help. She knew exactly where the bread, milk, and eggs were. And Max made sure she never bumped into anything. Bus ride to work. Emily worked at a small library, organizing audiobooks and helping others with visual impairments find what they needed. Max always guided her safely to her desk. Evening walk home. After work, they took a peaceful walk home. The world was busy, but Emily and Max moved through it like a perfect team. This was her life. Simple, steady, and safe. But not everyone understood how capable she was. Some people looked at her with sad eyes. Some whispered, "Poor thing." Some even tried to grab her arm to help, even when she didn't need it. Emily was used to being underestimated, but she didn't mind, because she had a secret only she and Max knew. Most people thought Max was just a guide dog, a helper for a blind woman, a sweet, well-trained pet. But they were wrong. Max was not just any dog. Before he became Emily's guide, Max had lived a very different life. A dangerous life. Max was once a Navy SEAL K-9. He had trained with the toughest soldiers. He had been on secret missions. He had traveled to places most people had never even heard of. Max had saved lives. He had chased down enemies. He had found hidden bombs. He had protected his team from danger. He had seen war. But after years of service, Max had retired. He had earned his rest. He had been given a second chance at life, a new mission. That mission was Emily. When Emily had first met Max, she had no idea about his past. She had simply been told that he was a well-trained guide dog. But from the very first day, she could feel that Max was different. He was calm, but always alert. He was gentle, but strong. He never got scared, never hesitated. And most of all, he never let anything happen to her. As Emily and Max walked through the city, life moved all around them. A little boy gasped when he saw Max's mom. "Look at that big dog." An older woman smiled. "Such a beautiful animal." A businessman rushed past them, too busy with his phone to even notice them. A teenager on a skateboard zoomed by, making a loud noise as his wheels scraped the pavement. Max didn't react to any of it. He kept walking, always focused, always watching. Emily listened to the sounds of the city, the hum of cars, the chatter of people, the distant sound of music from a street performer. Everything felt normal, peaceful, but something was about to change. Something was coming, and Max could sense it. As they reached a quieter street, Max's ears twitched. His body tensed just slightly. Emily noticed. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Max didn't pull her forward. He didn't move. He just listened. Emily trusted Max more than she trusted anyone. If Max sensed something, it meant something was wrong. Footsteps, heavy boots on pavement, a deep voice laughing. Then the low, deep rumble of motorcycles. Bikers. Emily wasn't afraid of much, but something about the way Max stood so still made her heart beat a little faster. A few seconds later, the noise grew louder. The motorcycle slowed down. The voices got closer. Then one of them spoke. "Hey lady, need some help crossing the street?" The words were meant to sound polite, but the tone wasn't. It was mocking. Emily stayed calm. She had dealt with rude people before. She took a step forward. "No, thank you. I'm fine." Max didn't move. Another voice joined in. This one was sharper, rougher. "You sure? Wouldn't want you walking into traffic." Laughter followed. More engines revved. Emily's grip on Max's harness tightened. She knew what this was. They weren't here to help. They were here to bully. And that was a mistake. Because Max wasn't just a guide dog. He was a warrior. And they had no idea what was about to happen next. Emily walked steadily along the sidewalk, her hand resting lightly on Max's harness. The city was alive with sounds, cars honking, people talking, footsteps clicking against the pavement. It was a normal day just like any other. But then something changed. A deep, low rumble filled the air. It wasn't a car. It wasn't a truck. It was motorcycles. Emily's ears picked up the sound immediately. It was growing louder, coming closer. The deep growl of the engines echoed against the buildings. Max noticed it too. His ears twitched. His body tensed ever so slightly. Emily didn't stop walking, but she felt it, a shift in the air. Then, the rumbling slowed. The motorcycles weren't just passing by. They were slowing down. Emily could feel the presence of people around her. The heavy thud of boots hitting the ground. The low chuckles. The quiet snickers. She wasn't alone anymore. A rough voice called out, "Hey lady, need some help crossing the street?" The words were fake kind, mocking. They weren't really offering help. They were making fun of her. Emily ignored them. She had dealt with rude people before. She just had to keep walking. Max stayed close. His body was stiff, alert. Another voice, this one meaner, louder. "You sure? Wouldn't want you walking into traffic." Laughter followed. Loud, harsh, cruel. Emily's grip on Max's harness tightened. She kept her head high, her step steady. She wouldn't let them know they were bothering her. She wouldn't give them the reaction they wanted. But the bikers weren't done. One of them revved his engine hard, the sudden noise like a roar in the air. Emily felt the vibration in her chest. Then, tires screeched. A sharp turn. A motorcycle moving fast, too close. Then a voice. "Oops, almost didn't see you there." More laughter. Emily's heart pounded. Not from fear, from anger. Max stopped in his tracks. His ears were up. His muscles were tight. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. But he was ready. The sidewalk was still full of people. Busy shoppers. Men in suits. Women carrying grocery bags. Kids holding their parents' hands. They all saw what was happening. But no one stepped in. Some people looked away, pretending not to notice. Some walked faster, not wanting to get involved. A few glanced at Emily with pity, but did nothing. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to speak up. Emily was used to this. She knew how the world worked. When you were blind, people either ignored you or felt sorry for you. But no one saw her for what she really was, strong. No one saw Max for what he really was, dangerous. And that was their biggest mistake. The rumbling engines moved again. The bikers weren't leaving. They were circling, like vultures around prey. Emily listened carefully. She could hear at least 4 different bikes. They were moving slowly, following her. One of them, the leader maybe, pulled up beside her. His voice was close now, just a few feet away. "That's a nice dog you got there." Emily didn't respond. Max didn't move. But Emily could feel his muscles tighten under her hand. Another voice. A different man. Is he dangerous? Or just a fluffy little pet? More laughter. Emily took a slow breath. She wasn't scared. Not yet. But she was angry. Max could feel it. He stayed quiet, but his ears twitched listening. His tail was stiff. Emily knew that Max was waiting for her signal. The bikers didn't know that they were standing next to a trained Navy SEAL K-9. A warrior. A protector. A dog who had taken down dangerous men before. And he was about to do it again. One of the bikers made a move. He reached out. Not for Emily, but for Max. His fingers barely brushed against Max's fur. In a flash, Max moved. He turned his head sharply, his teeth bared. A warning. A deep, low growl rumbled from his throat. Dangerous. Powerful. The biker jerked his hand back. "Whoa," he yelped, stepping away. His friends laughed, but it was nervous laughter now. They hadn't expected that. They thought Max was just a pet. They thought Emily was just a weak, blind woman. They were wrong. Emily finally stopped walking. She turned her head slightly toward the leader, even though she couldn't see him. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "You might want to step back." Silence. Max stood tall beside her, his eyes locked onto the men. Waiting. Ready. The leader chuckled, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Oh yeah? And what's a blind lady gonna do if I don't?" Emily tilted her head. Then she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, knowing one. "It's not me you should be worried about." Her fingers gently tapped Max's harness. It was the signal. Max's body shifted. His growl deepened. His muscles tensed. His tail went still, a soldier's stance. The bikers felt the shift in the air. Suddenly, this wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't a game. The leader cleared his throat. He took a small step back. "TCH. Let's go, boys." Engines roared back to life. Boots scraped against the pavement. The bikers backed away. One by one they left. Emily stood still, listening to the sound of them disappearing down the street. When she was sure they were gone, she sighed. She reached down, her fingers brushing through Max's fur. "Good boy." Max finally relaxed. His ears twitched again. His tail wagged, just a little. Crisis over. Mission complete. The people on the sidewalk, the ones who had done nothing, finally started moving again. A few of them looked at Emily with wide eyes. They had just witnessed something incredible. But Emily didn't care. She simply kept walking. Because for her and Max, this was just another day. The aftermath, Emily walked forward, her steps steady, as if nothing had happened. The city moved on around her, but something had changed. The people on the sidewalk who had ignored her a moment ago were now whispering. Some stole quick glances at her and Max. Others simply hurried away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. Emily knew this feeling well. When people saw her as just a blind woman, they either pitied her or ignored her. But when they saw what Max could do, they suddenly didn't know what to think. She could almost hear their thoughts. How did she stay so calm? What kind of dog is that? Who is she? Emily didn't stop to explain. She had nothing to prove. She reached down and gave Max a soft pat on his head. "Come on, boy. Let's go home." Max relaxed now that the danger was gone. His ears twitched one last time before he fell back in a step beside her. His tail wagged just a little, but his sharp eyes remained alert. Even though the bikers were gone, Max's job wasn't over. It was never over. A few blocks away, the gang of bikers pulled into a gas station. Their engines growled to a stop, and the leader, a tall man with a scruffy beard, climbed off his motorcycle. He pulled off his helmet and exhaled sharply. "What the hell was that?" One of his men muttered, still shaking his head. The others mumbled in agreement. They had bullied plenty of people before, but never like this. That dog, it wasn't normal. The leader frowned, rubbing his chin. Max's growl still echoed in his mind. The way the dog had moved, controlled, powerful, trained, wasn't something you saw in an ordinary pet. And then there was Emily. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't shown a single sign of fear. "She knew," he muttered. The others looked at him. "Knew what?" one asked. The leader narrowed his eyes. "That we were making a mistake." His fingers tightened around his helmet. They had underestimated her. All of them had. And now, something about that woman and her dog didn't sit right. Not at all. Emily finally reached her apartment building, her fingers brushing the familiar metal railing as she climbed the steps. Max led her carefully, making sure she didn't miss a single step. Once inside, she locked the door and sighed. She ran her hand through Max's fur. "You knew before I did, didn't you?" she murmured. Max wagged his tail slightly, his tongue lolling out just a little in response. Emily smiled. "You always know." She put her cane by the door and walked to the kitchen, following the routine she knew by heart. She filled Max's water bowl, then grabbed his favorite chew toy and placed it next to him. He had earned it. As Max lay down on his bed, Emily sat nearby, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. She should have felt at ease, but something about today bothered her. She had been bullied before. People had mocked her, underestimated her. But these bikers were different. They had left, but she had felt something in their voices. Something unfinished. Max let out a quiet huff in his sleep, his ears twitching even as he rested. Emily reached out and rested her hand on his back. "Whatever happens next, we'll handle it. Just like always." Outside in the dark city streets, a motorcycle engine roared to life. The night wasn't over yet. Emily stood still for just a moment. The night air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. The streetlights above flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the pavement. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the sounds around her. The soft hum of passing cars, distant footsteps of people walking home, the faint rustle of leaves as the wind passed through the city, and then the low rumble of motorcycle engines still lingering in the distance. They hadn't completely left. Not yet. Emily knew. She whispered something under her breath. A single word. A command only one other soul could understand. "Mux." Max's body changed instantly. His ears snapped up. His breathing became steady, slow, controlled. His posture shifted from relaxed to ready. His tail stopped wagging. His muscles tensed, not in fear but in focus. Max was no longer just a friendly guide dog leading his owner home. He was something else, something dangerous, something the bikers had no idea they were dealing with. Most people saw Max as just another service dog, a helper, a guide, a loyal friend to a blind woman. But they were wrong. Max was not an ordinary dog. He was a retired Navy SEAL K-9, a war hero, a soldier who had once stood on battlefields, where bullets flew past him and danger was everywhere. A warrior who had protected elite soldiers in life-or-death missions. A fighter who had taken down criminals, terrorists, and men who thought they were untouchable. And now, he had a new mission: protect Emily. At all costs. Down the street, the bikers were talking in low voices. They had stopped their motorcycles just around the corner, watching Emily from the shadows. "Dude, I don't know about this," one of them muttered, rubbing his arms as if trying to shake off a cold chill. The leader, his name was Griff, snorted, "Come on, man. It's just some blind chick and her dog." But the way he said it, he didn't believe it anymore. Because something about that moment, about that dog, felt wrong. Max's eyes, that look, that quiet, deadly stillness. It wasn't normal. One of the other bikers, a guy with a scar down his jaw, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just leave it, man." Griff's hands tightened into fists. He was the leader. He didn't back down. He didn't run from some woman and her pet. "I just want to have a little fun. Teach her a lesson for ignoring us." His voice was sharp, but there was doubt in it now. Still, he made his choice. And it was the wrong one. Griff took a deep breath. He rolled his shoulders back, cracking his neck, then reached into his leather jacket. A switchblade. He flicked it open with a sharp click. The metal glinted under the street lights. "Let's go." The bikers hesitated, but then one by one, they followed. They had no idea that they were walking straight into a fight they would never forget. Emily didn't need eyes to know what was happening. She could hear their footsteps. Slow, careful, hunting her. She could hear the slight scrape of metal against leather, a knife being pulled. She could feel their presence getting closer, the way the air shifted around her. She didn't turn around. She didn't run. She didn't need to. Instead, she took a slow breath and whispered again. A second command. "Max, ready." And Max moved. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply shifted his stance, his body becoming a wall of muscle and discipline. He was locked onto his new mission. Griff and his crew didn't even see it coming. 1 second, they were moving forward, their confidence still holding. The next, Max exploded into action. With a sudden, precise leap, he lunged straight for the nearest biker. The man barely had time to blink before Max's powerful jaws snapped shut around his wrist. A scream, a knife clattering to the ground. The biker collapsed to his knees, trying to yank his arm free, but Max didn't let go. His grip was like iron. His teeth, trained to take down men in full combat gear, were unbreakable. And the worst part? Max wasn't even using full force yet. Emily stood still, calm. She gave her next command. Max, hold. Max froze, his grip firm but controlled. The biker whimpered, his free hand slapping the ground. Get him off! Get him off me! Griff's face went pale. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how dogs behaved. What kind of dog is that? One of the others choked out, stumbling backward. Max's eyes were locked onto Griff now. Waiting, watching, ready. Emily finally spoke, her voice steady. You should leave. Silence. Then, screw this. One of the bikers turned and ran. Another followed. Then another. Only Griff remained. His breathing was rough, his eyes darting between Emily and Max. His grip on his switchblade trembled. He thought about fighting. Then he thought about the dog. His mind raced. He remembered the silent way Max had moved, the way his teeth locked like a steel trap. And he knew. He had already lost. Griff took a step back. Then another. His hands shaking. He shoved the switchblade into his pocket and turned. And then he ran. Emily waited until she could no longer hear them. Then, Max release. Max immediately let go. The biker he had held scrambled to his feet and bolted down the street, still clutching his wrist. The night was silent again. Emily reached down and ran her hand along Max's back. Good boy. Max's tail wagged just once. Mission complete. As the bikers disappeared, Griff's mind spun. He had led his crew into something he didn't understand. That woman, that dog, they weren't normal. Something about it all felt off. Then his eyes widened. He had seen military dogs before, in videos, on the news, and he remembered what someone once told him. Navy SEAL dogs aren't pets. They're weapons. His stomach turned cold. Had they just messed with a SEAL K-9? Had they just tried to attack a woman protected by a trained soldier? Griff cursed under his breath. They had made a mistake. A huge mistake. And something told him this wasn't over. The tension in the air was thick. Emily and Max stood in the middle of the sidewalk, facing down the bikers. The quiet of the evening seemed to hold its breath, the soft rustling of leaves and distant traffic the only sounds. But for Emily, the world around her had gone still. She could feel the change in the atmosphere, the shift in energy as the bikers closed in on her. Her hand was steady on Max's harness, her fingers lightly brushing his fur. She didn't need to see them to know what they were planning. She could feel it in the way they moved, in the way the air felt heavier. One of the bikers, the tallest and most confident of them all, took a step forward. He reached out, his fingers curling as if to grab Emily's arm, to show her just how much power he had. Before anyone could blink, Max reacted. With the speed and precision that only a highly trained dog could possess, he lunged forward. His muscles coiled and then unleashed in an instant, his jaws snapping shut with a force that sent a loud crack through the air. Just inches from the biker's wrist, Max stopped. But the power in his movement was clear. This was no regular dog. His deep, rumbling growl echoed in the quiet night, sending a cold shiver down the spines of every biker present. The man froze, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at Max's massive, unblinking gaze. The dog was so still, so focused, as if he had all the time in the world to decide whether or not to bite. Max's growl grew deeper, louder, as if to say, I can take you down in a second, but I don't need to. The biker stumbled back, his face draining of color. He tripped over his own feet and fell to the ground, scrambling to get away from Max. He looked like he had just seen a ghost, and for good reason. What the? He gasped, his voice high-pitched with panic. Emily stood still, calm as ever. She had seen this kind of reaction from people before, but there was something different about the way the bikers were reacting this time. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking her. They were scared. Emily's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the tension in the air. You might want to walk away now, she said, her tone so calm it seemed almost out of place in the face of the chaos. Max didn't bark. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to send a clear message to the gang. The bikers stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Their eyes flicked between Emily, who was standing there unafraid, and Max, who was still standing tall, his eyes locked onto the nearest biker. They had expected an easy target. They had thought they could intimidate a blind woman and her dog. But now, as they looked at the massive canine, they realized they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had bargained for. One of the bikers cursed under his breath, his body tense. He was the first to break the silence. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, his voice low but full of fear. And just like that, the gang turned and began to retreat. One by one, they scrambled to their motorcycles, their movements quick and panicked. The tall biker who had tried to grab Emily fumbled with his bike keys, his hands shaking as he tried to start the engine. Within seconds, the roar of engines filled the air and the gang was gone. The sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance as they sped away, leaving Emily and Max alone on the sidewalk once more. Max stood perfectly still, watching the retreating figures. His muscles were still tight, his eyes focused, but the tension slowly began to leave his body. Emily let out a soft sigh and gently rubbed Max's head. "You did good, boy," she murmured, her voice full of pride. Max's tail gave a small wag, as if to say, "I know." As the bikers disappeared into the night, something in the air seemed to shift. The city, once again, seemed quiet and peaceful, but Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. She knew the bikers hadn't seen it, the true power of Max. They had no idea just how dangerous the situation could have been. And Emily? She had known all along. You see, Emily had never been a typical blind woman. She wasn't someone who needed to be protected. Not by the bikers, not by anyone. She had been trained, but not just Emily. Max, her loyal guide dog, was not what they thought he was. He wasn't just a companion. He wasn't just a guide. He was a war hero, a highly trained Navy SEAL K-9 who had seen and done things that most people could never imagine. When Emily first met Max, she hadn't known the full extent of his past. She had only known that he was perfect for her needs, gentle, patient, and incredibly smart. But over time, she learned about Max's true nature, about the training he had received, about the countless lives he had saved. Max had once served alongside Navy SEALs in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He had been through hell and back, and he had saved lives, human lives, while risking his own. He had taken down criminals, stopped terrorists, and protected soldiers in battle. And now his mission had changed. His job was no longer to protect soldiers in war zones. His mission was to protect Emily, the woman who had become his new partner, his new purpose. Max had given everything for his country, and now he gave everything for her. But most people didn't know that. To them, Max was just a big dog who helped a blind woman. He was sweet and calm, always by her side. They didn't see the sharp intelligence in his eyes or the years of training that had shaped him into a warrior. They didn't see the dog who could take down a grown man with a single move. They didn't see the Navy SEAL. The bikers had made a huge mistake. They hadn't just messed with any blind woman and her dog. They had made the fatal mistake of underestimating Emily and Max. And now they were gone. But the story didn't end there. Max's protective instinct would always be there, always ready to act at a moment's notice. Emily knew that the next time someone tried to make a move on her, she wouldn't have to worry. Max would be there, ready to protect her no matter the cost. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a hero, a warrior, a soldier, and no one would ever forget that again. As the bikers sped off into the night, their taillights flickering into the distance, the street grew quieter. The danger had passed, but the tension in the air lingered for just a moment longer. Emily and Max stood alone in the middle of the sidewalk, the world around them still and peaceful. But for Emily, she knew this was just the beginning. Max's posture relaxed, and the powerful tension in his muscles eased. But he never took his eyes off the street, as though waiting for another threat to appear. Emily smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. She knew she wasn't alone, not really. She had Max, a companion like no other. A protector, a friend, and, above all, a warrior who would never leave her side. But as the seconds passed, Emily's thoughts shifted. She had seen what happened when the bikers underestimated her and Max. They thought they could intimidate a blind woman, but instead, they had learned the hard way just how dangerous it was to mess with the wrong pair. The world around her might not always see her the way she truly was, But she knew. And Max knew. The question was, how many others would learn the truth? What would happen the next time someone tried to challenge her? Or try to harm her in any way? Would they, too, be surprised by the true strength of the quiet woman and her retired Navy SEAL, K9? But for now, Emily and Max walked away from the scene, back on their path toward home, leaving the biker's threat behind them. They knew that the world could be a cruel place, but they also knew they were ready to face anything it threw their way. Together, as they walked down the empty street, the glow of the streetlights bathed them in soft light. Emily's steps were steady, with Max's leash firmly held in her hand. Max, his head held high, kept pace with her, just a few steps ahead as usual, leading her with confidence, just as he always did. They had been through a lot together, both in her life and in his, and every step they took was a testament to their bond. But Emily knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of their story. It couldn't be. There were still many challenges ahead, many people who would doubt them, and many dangers lurking just beyond the horizon. But they would face it all side by side. The street was quiet now. The bikers were gone. The sound of their roaring engines had faded into the night, leaving only the soft hum of distant traffic. The bright streetlights cast a warm glow on the sidewalk, and the air, once filled with tension, now felt peaceful again. Emily stood there with Max by her side, her hand gently resting on his fur. He was calm now, his alert eyes watching the empty road. His ears were relaxed, his tail barely moving, as if he knew the threat had passed. But Emily could feel the change. She could sense it in the way people were looking at her. The same people who had ignored her earlier were now staring with wide eyes. They had witnessed something incredible, something that had made them realize how wrong they had been to assume that Emily was just another blind woman. She was more than that. Max was more than just a guide dog. It wasn't just Emily's calmness or Max's strength that had made the bikers back off. It was the fact that they had underestimated them both. They thought they could intimidate her because she couldn't see them. They didn't know that she wasn't alone, that she had a protector, a friend, a warrior by her side. A retired Navy SEAL, K9, who had saved lives and taken down dangerous criminals. A dog who had seen more in his lifetime than most people could even imagine. The people on the sidewalk slowly began to gather around. Some of them were still trying to process what had just happened. Others were whispering to each other, nodding in disbelief. They had all seen what Max could do. They had all witnessed the quiet, unassuming woman stand her ground with the help of her extraordinary dog. Emily didn't mind the stares. She wasn't angry. She didn't feel the need to explain herself to anyone. She knew the truth, and that was enough. She was proud of Max, proud of the bond they shared, and proud that he had protected her when she needed it most. One of the shop owners, a man who had been watching from the window of his store, stepped outside. He was a little older, his hair graying at the temples, and he looked at Emily and Max with a mix of awe and curiosity. "I've never seen anything like that," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "What kind of dog is he?" Emily smiled softly, reaching down to pat Max's head. She had to admit, she enjoyed moments like these, moments when people saw Max for who he truly was. "Just a very good boy," she replied, her voice full of warmth. The man's eyes widened even more. "A good boy, huh? I think he's more than just a good boy. That dog, he's something special." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "He is special," she said softly, giving Max another gentle pat. "But he's not just special because of his training. He's special because he's mine. He's always had my back. He's my best friend." The shop owner smiled, clearly impressed. "I can see that," he said. "That's one incredible dog you've got there. You're lucky to have him." Emily nodded again, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I'm the lucky one," she said. As the shop owner walked back into his store, others on the sidewalk started to come over. Some of them still looked a little uncertain, but there was a newfound respect in their eyes. They had seen Max in action. They had seen the power of his training, his strength, and his loyalty. They had seen that Emily wasn't just a helpless blind woman. She was strong, and so was her dog. The group that had once ignored her, the ones who had never taken the time to truly see her, were now starting to realize how wrong they had been. They were starting to understand that appearance could be deceiving. They were starting to see that sometimes the quietest people were the ones with the greatest strength. Max, for all his power and skill, never asked for praise. He never barked for attention. He didn't need the world to see what he could do. But he knew, deep down, that he had done his job. He had protected Emily, just as he had done so many times before. And now, he was at peace. The group of onlookers stood in silence for a moment, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Emily and Max had made their point. They had shown that they weren't to be underestimated. And now, everyone who had been there that evening would never forget the lesson they had learned. Emily turned to Max and gave him a soft smile. She could feel the warmth of his presence, the strength in his every movement. He had always been there for her. He had always been the one to guide her through the world, through the ups and downs. But tonight, he had shown the world just how powerful their bond truly was. "Let's go home, Max," Emily said softly, turning down the street toward her apartment. Max nodded his head, as if understanding exactly what she meant. He fell in a step beside her, his pace steady and strong. The two of them walked down the sidewalk, side by side, as they had done so many times before. But tonight it felt different. Tonight, they were not just a blind woman and her guide dog. They were a team, a force to be reckoned with. As they continued down the street, Emily noticed that more people were starting to smile at her, nodding in recognition. They didn't know her story, but they knew that something had changed. They had seen the power of loyalty and strength. They had seen that the world wasn't always what it seemed, and sometimes the quietest people had the loudest voices. Max walked proudly beside her, his tail wagging just a little. He knew that tonight had been a victory, not just for Emily, but for both of them. They had proven that no matter how small or unassuming someone might seem, they could still be powerful. They could still be a force for good. As they reached the corner of their street, Emily stopped and turned to Max. "You're my hero," she whispered, bending down to kiss the top of his head. Max's ears perked up, and he gave a small huff, as if saying, "I know." They stood there for a moment, the soft glow of the streetlights surrounding them, the night calm and peaceful once more. And as Emily continued on her way home with Max, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. No one would ever underestimate them again. As Emily walked away from the scene, she could feel a sense of calm settle over her. The night had gone from tense and dangerous to peaceful and quiet. The bikers were gone, and the street was once again just another place to walk. But Emily knew something had changed, something important. She was proud of herself. She had stayed calm when the bikers tried to intimidate her. And Max, her faithful guide dog, had stepped up in the moment of danger. He was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her partner, and her friend. And he had proven that tonight. As Emily continued walking down the sidewalk, she thought about the lesson she had just learned. It wasn't just about the bikers or the trouble they had caused. It wasn't just about how Max had scared them off with his powerful presence. It was about something deeper, something that mattered far more than any fight or confrontation. Never underestimate someone just because they seem vulnerable. She thought about how many people might look at her and think she was weak. She was blind, after all. Some people might see her as someone who needed help, someone who couldn't do things on her own. But Emily knew the truth. She knew that she was stronger than people thought. And Max knew it too. There was strength in quiet moments. There was power in the calm. And sometimes being underestimated could be an advantage. The bikers had thought they could mess with her because they didn't know her. They didn't know the bond she shared with Max, and they didn't know what he was capable of. They didn't know that Emily wasn't someone to mess with. As she turned the corner, she thought about how people often made judgments based on what they saw on the outside. But the outside didn't always tell the whole story. Emily had learned that lesson the hard way. She had lived through moments when people looked at her and saw only a blind woman, not knowing the strength that lived inside her. Max had taught her that lesson too. Her dog wasn't just a cute companion. He wasn't just a dog to help her get from one place to another. Max had served in the military. He had been a Navy SEAL K-9. He had been trained to handle dangerous situations, and he had been part of missions that saved lives. He had faced danger head-on, and he had always protected his team. Now, Max was retired, but that didn't mean he was weak or less powerful. He was as strong as ever. And tonight, he had proven that he could handle anything that came their way. Emily smiled to herself as she thought about the lesson they had just learned together. It wasn't just about the bikers and how they had backed off when Max showed his strength. It was about something much bigger than that. It was about respect. It was about standing up for yourself when others might try to bring you down. It was about knowing your own worth, even when the world around you doesn't seem to see it. As Emily continued to walk, she thought about how people like her, people who might seem weak or helpless at first glance, often face the most challenges. It was easy for people to judge based on appearances. It was easy to assume that someone who couldn't see wouldn't be able to do much. But Emily knew better than that. She had learned that the quietest people could have the strongest voices. The people who were overlooked could be the ones who made the biggest impact. And it wasn't just about what she had done tonight, either. It was about what she would continue to do. It was about how she would keep moving forward, how she would keep facing challenges with Max by her side. There would be more moments like tonight. There would be more people who underestimated her and tried to take advantage of her. But she wouldn't let that stop her. She wouldn't let anyone make her feel small or weak again. As she reached the front door of her apartment, Emily stopped and looked down at Max. He was still walking beside her, steady and strong, his head held high. Max was always there, always watching over her. He didn't need to be told what to do. He knew what to do because he had been trained for moments like this. And even though he was retired, he was still the same dog he had always been. Max was a hero, and so was Emily. She knew that sometimes people could be cruel. Sometimes people would judge her because of what they could see on the outside. But Emily also knew that the world didn't always know what was on the inside. The world didn't always see the strength, the courage, or the power that lived inside her and Max. But she didn't need the world's approval. She didn't need anyone's permission to be strong. She knew what she was capable of, and she knew what Max was capable of too. Never underestimate someone who is quiet. Never assume that just because someone looks vulnerable, they are. People can surprise you. And sometimes, the people who seem the weakest have the most power. Emily had learned that lesson well. Max had shown her that lesson every day. As Emily walked inside her apartment, she gave Max one last pat on the head. She smiled down at him. "Good boy," she whispered, grateful for him every single day. They had been through a lot together. But no matter what came next, Emily knew one thing for sure. She would face it with Max by her side. And no one, not the bikers or anyone else, would ever make her feel small again.